This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Mercury. Whether you're ramping up advertising ahead of the holidays or boosting inventory before a new launch, get the cash you need to grow. Mercury is a financial software company loved by over 200,000 startups and small businesses, and they now offer working capital loans specifically for e-commerce companies. Features include holistic underwriting that looks at all your sales platforms so you get the best possible offer, a fixed weekly payback schedule for better financial planning, and no personal guarantee or prepayment penalties. Confidently fund what's next with Mercury Working Capital. See if you're eligible at mercury.com/CTC. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined today, as I usually am, and he's gotten a little bit of sun here. It's Mr. Taylor Holiday, our CEO here at Common Thread. Taylor, what's going on, man?
Yeah, don't mind my bright red face. I was rushed and late to a children's soccer game, forgot a hat, didn't have any sunscreen, and sat for 3 hours watching my kids play soccer, just roasting. So here I am, bright and red today for you.
There we go. Okay, all right. Well, here's a segue for you. Taylor's face is well done. Here's another thing well done, and it's one of his opinions. And so recently, yeah, I can work on that one. Taylor, you dropped a thread. This is back in the 16th of this month, maybe. But basically the discussion point was around basically goal setting in a business and how rarely that's actually related to the generation of value for shareholders. And I think there's a lot of things that we can dig into here, but maybe let's just kick it off by sort of like frame this sort of this tweet or set of tweets or this thought that you had, and then we can dig into it deeper.
As I'm continuing to lean more into the financial side of businesses, I'm trying to really understand the cultural norms that have sort of led to these patterns of behavior. I think that a lot, like we as people, the things we learn to do are usually things that we were either taught or that we watched other people do. And so we develop this pattern of sort of monkey see, monkey do that becomes the basis for an industry. Like that's like sort of the behavioral patterns because they're just so consistent. Like the problems are so pervasively the same across all these customers that I'm interacting with. And so I'm sort of trying to almost alongside the like rigorous financial and tactical side, get to like the sociology of it and try and understand a little bit about what's happening. And one of the things that I feel like I'm coming to is this idea that entrepreneurs are not actually trying to make money. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the business objective that they have chosen to operate isn't actually connected to the idea that they want to get the money out of the business into their pockets. And I think that this is something that I really want to war against is that all of the narratives about how people run and operate businesses and where we celebrate usually have to do with this like sort of monumental effort where everything you do is poured into this thing for a period of time that culminates in this singular moment of realization of value in an IPO or a grand exit. And that's like, therefore, what we all do along the way is like, we just keep betting it all on black. Is that every time we win, whether that's with a product release or a sale or a great year even, we just take all the chips every time and push them back into the middle and push them back into the middle and push them back into the middle until eventually something happens that more often than not means that there are no more chips. And I've been trying to think about why this happens a little bit, and it's part of why my assessment of the business model between service and e-commerce has become such a topic for me of why I think service business offers you greater flexibility in that because it requires less chip betting, essentially. It creates more availability of cash for you to make choices to pay yourself. I also think that there's a lot of norms around whether it's right or wrong to take the money out of the business as the people owning it, the complexities in cap tables and what that creates. But money gets trapped inside of these organizations. And what that really means is that it gets siphoned out to a bunch of other people. All the costs in your business begin to siphon the money out of your business and out of your pocket, really. And I would love for part of my next phase of life, a next chapter of business service to put more money into the pockets of shareholders. Like that's like a thing I want to be known for in a way that I think could be really impactful for businesses. And it's been really fascinating to sort of begin to tangle with this idea on a more sociological level than a sort of tactical financial one.
Mhm. So before we maybe dig into the sort of more philosophical implications or sociological implications, let's talk about like the specifics of the type of thing that happens. Like what's a sort of characteristic scenario here?
Yeah. So one, I'd say, well documented the challenge in generating the availability of cash. So just like, I don't think we need to rehash how hard it is to just win the game, which is
Mhm.
to say, like, at the end of the day, there was money in a bank account and it got bigger. Like, there's all the tactical challenges of why that's a really hard thing to do. Okay. But then there's this whole other massive hurdle that happens when the money exists in the account itself, which is what to do with it. And this is probably part of my greater lived reality now, which is that in CTC's success over the last couple of years, my job has transitioned to having to think about these questions because we have more money than we've had in a long time. And so you begin to think about, what do I do with it when there's excess? And should I maintain excess? And should I distribute it? Should I buy back shares? Should I pay debt? Should we reinvest in some new initiative? Should we acquire a company? Like, there's all these things that you begin to consider. And so I'm recognizing my own emotional relationship to the idea of putting it in my pocket. I'm recognizing all the other things that compete for that idea, uh, and how many things pull at me to push the chips back in as the right thing to do for the organization.
Mhm. So let's talk about then some of those pressures.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So what are the
why is
specifics?
this keep happening? Yeah.
Yeah. So in order to grow, they're different in every business. Let's use e-commerce as an example. I'll give you a very specific example right now. We are having a conversation with a client about Q4 inventory purchasing. And they sort of have a choice, right? About how much inventory they want to buy. And of course, there's a spectrum of possible outcomes here that range from like the 99th percentile highest value outcome, and then the lowest, the like a really bad outcome, right? And there's like a spectrum of possibility, and those bounds are sometimes pretty wide, but in some cases for brands that have been around, you can get it pretty tight. But even within that choice, okay, there is a tension. And the question is, you can sort of be wrong on two sides of this. You can be wrong where you had too little inventory and you actually sold out, or you could be wrong where you have too much inventory and you didn't, and then you're left with excess inventory that's challenging to move. And each of those are sort of a different set of problems where the cash ends up in different places. If you have too much inventory, the cash sort of ends up on the balance sheet, but it likely means that you satiated the most available demand. Whereas if you have too little inventory, then you probably have more cash, but less maybe total volume of available dollars, because you left some demand on the table. And so that choice is almost never made through the lens of, well, how much money would we have available to put in our pockets at the end of the decision? Which one maximizes for that? Like, nobody talks that way. And there's a million competing reasons why, usually because the cap tables aren't that clean. And so the distribution of capital sometimes can be not that incentivizing to everyone in the process. Or also, it's just not the normal pattern of behavior that you ever think to solve for, is which one optimizes for cash in the bank account, such that I could, at the end of this sale, literally like at the end of an individual moment. The other thing that happens is like the idea of distribution of capital is sort of locked into like the calendar. It's like at the end of the year, we will review the bank account and make a decision,
Mhm.
versus like, well, what if at the end of this moment that you won, where you created this mini game that was this peak moment that you created, what if you just decided to give yourself some money then? And that these are just not normal things to think about.
Mhm.
And so it's all about, how do you make the next big bet to continue to grow the thing forevermore? Another example is, right now I have a client that is a big business and they're in really great position. And we're having this like really intense argument about where they should set their media target relative to their desired return on invested capital over a year. And I am under the belief that they are functionally just giving Mark Zuckerberg money. In other words, they are taking a level of inefficiency that is not necessary for their
Mhm.
business. But there would likely be some trade-off between volume and efficiency on the top line that would happen if they were to reduce their efficiency requirements and hold themselves to a higher standard, uh, as a business. But they have so much money literally like cash in the bank account. And the founder doesn't, for whatever reason, want to distribute the capital to the shareholders. There's probably complexities there that are beyond my exact understanding because there's a lot of relational dynamics there that are hard. And so they're just like, well, this is good enough. And
Mm.
as a deployment of our cash, this is sort of good enough. And I just look at that and I just go, man, like, again, it's taking all the chips and it's putting them back on the table and going, this is all a plan to create a liquidity event at some point. And man, I hope it happens. I really
Mhm.
do. But damn it, if you couldn't offset a lot of risk by maybe not making as aggressive a bet on this efficiency and really continue to set yourself up for winning, for realizing the value of the thing that you've created that's magnificent. And I don't know. And when I look at it, the person I think that actually wins that game is Mark Zuckerberg. Like, I really
Yeah.
think that when I look at the ecosystem, I look and I go, Toby at Shopify has sort of convinced us that he's serving all of us as entrepreneurs, and
Mhm.
that's cool. I believe that there is genuine intent there to do that. Same thing with Zuck. I think but I also watch them disproportionately capture value from the ecosystem
Mhm.
personally, like to the point of being billionaires, right? Like, and I just wonder if maybe some of the value capture could be redistributed and not in a
Right.
not in a communistic obligatory way, but in a capitalistic intentionally acted on way. So that's a
That's
couple of
interesting.
examples.
If you want to grow your business, but need a partner who really understands your industry, it's time to check out Mercury Working Capital. Mercury is the all-in-one banking and lending solution for e-commerce businesses. In addition to powerful accounts and built-in financial workflows, they now offer working capital loans made with you in mind. Get started at mercury.com/CTC to see if you're eligible for a working capital loan with a fixed weekly repayment schedule, no personal guarantee, and no prepayment penalties. That's mercury.com/CTC.
Yeah. I don't know, that the last thing you mentioned there kind of sort of, or your point about Zuckerberg reminds me of the speech that Matthew McConaughey gives in Wolf of Wall Street, where he's talking about how essentially none of the trades that they do are realized in any real way. So money never ends up in the pockets of the
That's right.
investors, but they make commission on everything. And that's essentially what's happening
That's
here, is that
right.
other people are making commission on your money while you yourself never see any return on it, essentially.
All the time. That's a great metaphor. Is that like,
Yeah.
and in that case, you had this like, Leonardo DiCaprio obviously playing this character where he's very conscious of that intent is to never give them their
Yeah.
money back. And it's really nefarious. And I don't actually think that's what's happening. Although I do think candidly, like some of the like, we're here to support you message is very
Mhm.
self-serving. And,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
all of these like agencies and software and all the things that compete for your precious resource. I just watch too many entrepreneurs be too broke for the amount
Mhm.
of money that exists inside of the thing. It's like
Yeah.
there's $50 million of money moving around every year, and the entrepreneur is making $150,000. And you're just like, where's all that $50 million going? Well, it's going to your manufacturer, and then it goes to your payment processor, and then it goes to Meta, and then it goes to your shipping, and then it goes to your fulfillment, and then it goes to your employee base, and that's $50 million of value that gets deployed into the system, which I get it is good for the economy, it's good for the GDP, but like you, the person who created this thing, are capturing such a small percentage of the value that I actually think it's like really poor system design. You're
Mhm.
not capturing the right amount of value relative to the thing that you created. And that's where I think there's lots of opportunity to get better.
Yeah. Okay. So let's keep digging into like what are the, maybe it's sociological, maybe it's human pressures that prevent people from even thinking this way in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, for instance, being seen as sort of the fat cat owner who's taking a huge distribution at the end and where everyone else gets the shaft or whatever. Like, so there, that could be sort of a ethical, moral pressure that people feel. But what are the other things that sort of prevent, like, what is this mindset that's been created that prevent people from, let's say, taking a distribution or getting themselves paid after a sale event, let's say?
So one of the things I hear people say a lot is like, well, I don't have a better place to invest the money. Like, it's this
Hmm.
idea that if you took the money out, there's a few things that happen. One is like it's a taxable event. So we all hate the government for some reason. Like this is just like
Yeah.
a very American ideal right now that like paying taxes is just like the worst thing I could ever do. And so the
Yeah.
idea that if I took the money out, I would have to give 30% of it to the government, just like that right there, people hate.
Mm,
And that will keep the money trapped in there forever. And it's just like,
it's
people's
interesting.
relationship to taxes, I think, is really unhealthy. I watch people like move all over the world to like reduce their quality of life for the sake of avoiding this. Like there's all these things that I just go like, I think there's something that's there. So there's that. There's the government and
Mhm.
money and taxes and the feeling we have about that idea. Now I get it. The government's wasteful. I don't love giving them money either. But at the end of the day, that's the system I'm in. I was very conscious when I entered into it. And if I want the money in my pocket, some of it has to go to them. That's just the trade. So that's part of it. The other thing, so this idea that I don't have something better to do with it, it's like we believe that we have to be perfect capital allocators or investors all the time. That if we like took money out of our business and put it in our checking account instead of using it to grow our business, that we'd be making some sort of like really terrible idea or terrible decision. And maybe if you acted in this like really utilitarian view, that's probably true from like the use of money. But you could also just like buy your kid a bike. You could actually just consume it. It doesn't actually need to generate a return all the time that is monetarily measured. It could be measured in the quality of life that you're able to offer to yourself or to other people in the form of generosity or kindness or whatever you want. So I don't think we value those things the same way we value the idea of like, well, if I grow it back here, my business is growing 30% a year, so I could grow that money more next year. And it's like, I don't actually think you're doing that calculation well at all. And I just don't think we do. We don't do that thought work well at all. And we also don't actually have clarity of the lifestyle that we want or what we would do. Like learning how to spend money is like another skill you'll hear people talk about. Like
Mhm.
if all of a sudden you had $1 million in your bank account, what would you do with it? Like where would it go? What do you know things you enjoy? Like, do you like
Yeah, that's
do you
interesting.
like sailing? I don't know. Like I've never tried. Do you like scuba diving? I don't know. I've never
Yeah.
tried. Like so I don't think people you develop a lifestyle that sort of fits your means and you become generally satisfied with it. It's sort of that like classic, we find the misery we can tolerate and call it happiness. And like, we're all
Mhm.
sort of in that. And we don't always recognize that like, oh, if I actually did this other thing, I might actually like that more. And I also think there's a lot of ideas that tell us that like money is bad and the use of money is bad, which I think is like
Mhm.
an oppressive idea.
Yeah.
We're gonna give it. So I think it's like a way that people with money sort of like can oppress people who don't have it is to make you think that it's
Yeah.
bad. So I don't know.
No,
I
for
think
sure.
there's a lot culturally that's in the pot that
Yeah.
contribute to it.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, so that point about like well, it's interesting like that everybody's end goal seems to be something along the lines of an acquisition event. Like so rolling the dice for this like big almost like winning the lottery type thing to happen. But also like the idea that an acquisition event would be the ultimate win. And one thing that like I've observed anyway in like a lot of entrepreneurial types is that idea that like winning is the goal, but not making money. And those are winning
Yeah,
is
that's good.
tied to making money very tightly, but they're not exactly the same thing. So
Yeah.
the analogy I was using before we hit record is in the movie Heat. There's this moment where like Robert De Niro, who's kind of the leader of this crew of thieves who's trying to pull a heist. There's a big score that maybe has been compromised, and he's talking to his crew, and he's like, hey guys, you don't have to stick with this. And he's talking to one of his, he's like, hey man, like the juice is not worth the squeeze here. You got a family. I would just take what you got and leave. And he says, no, man, the action is the juice.
Yeah.
And that's that phrase, which is like the pursuit of money is the win. That is kind of like the thing that's playing a role here. Whether or not people even want to do that, there's a sense that's the right way to approach things,
So
maybe.
this is you are getting to what I actually think is happening that I'm starting to wake up to and go like,
Yeah.
oh shit, I'm
Yeah.
surrounded by dopamine addicts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
For sure.
I'm in it and we think we're trying to make money, but we're not. We're actually just feeding our addiction. And like it's all about the experience.
Yeah.
We're actually designing an experience. One where
Mhm.
we win sometimes and we lose sometimes, and we're putting it on the line and we're fighting to make it happen, and we're finding these little things. And the loss is actually a thing that we kind of crave because it remotivates us and gets us
Yeah.
re-energized to go solve more problems. And if we actually ever got out of that, we wouldn't know what to be. And so we intentionally we self-sabotage because that keeps us in it. That keeps us needed and wanted and depending on things. And this is why I think you get to this thing when people get out of it, you meet, and it's this sort of classic story of like, loss and depression
Mhm.
and all these things. And I'm like, oh, yeah, because you took an addict out of their game, like you made them recover from this feeling that they
Mhm.
optimized for every day. And so I'm looking at these P&Ls because the behavior is just so illogical that I just
Yeah.
can't. Like, you literally will be saying something and they'll be like, "Yeah, but I don't know." Like, I'm realizing it's not math. It's not a math problem where it's like they just need to see the numbers add up. It's that there's something else happening. It's something bigger
Yeah,
than
yeah.
that.
Interesting.
So I don't know. Go
No,
ahead.
so there's a couple things here. Like so one thing, like just to go back to even the very beginning of this discussion, which is like, I think there's sort of a premise that's been kind of unspoken here, which is that proceeding the way that you're describing would be good, right? It would be a better outcome, or like you just placed it, sort of phrased it as like being the logical outcome. Would it be create a scenario where you're actually pulling money out of the business? So like I would say like make your argument for the idea that this is better.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I think that it isn't necessarily better,
Mm.
but it creates more optionality for other versions of a life. And my experience of the people that I meet is that they're generally in these circumstances, like pretty anxious, pretty overwhelmed, and that there could be versions of their life that are better. And so I don't mean to assert for every individual what their ideal life is. And I don't ultimately really care what somebody wants to. I'll give them plenty of space to make that decision for themselves. I think what I watch happen is that there's some people that have like extricated themselves from it, and they're
Mhm.
like now above the fray in some ways that seem to have ascended within our society above this thing.
Mhm.
And I feel like I've met a few or know a few, and maybe they suffer the same anxiety, but they suffer it with better food. I don't know, with
Yeah.
nicer sheets and less chance of ruin in some ways. And so I think that there's probably, and it's not that like solves all problems or issues, but like if you think about, I know something as stupid as like the likelihood that you would attract a partner for your life, like it's sort of a joke, but being rich helps. Like, now, man, what does it attract? I don't know. Somebody who wants some version of that life, but it probably increases optionality. You'll have more people interested in doing things with you. Again, is it for the right reasons? I don't know. What does that phrase really mean? I just think that what I've experienced is that like there's a real sense of being trapped within the context of a thing that you can never extract value out of, and yet you're dependent on laboring towards every day.
Um,
Um, and that is really a toiling exercise that becomes at some point for people very draining.
yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, and
It's
if
kind
part
of,
of like
and
what
I
we're
think
con
it's like, sorry, last
but
thing. It's like the bigger American ideal. Like, I feel like when people get
yeah.
mad at, like when you hear people talk about, like there was that song that went super mega viral that this guy, like that one guy came up out of nowhere singing. I forget exactly how it went, but the general thematic, yeah, the rich man from Richmond, right? And the general thematic element was like, I toil all day, all the
Mhm.
time for all this effort and I get nothing for it. Right. And I think that's like the ultimate empty thing that nobody would ever say that they want is to labor endlessly and never reap the fruits of the labor.
Mhm.
Um, but in many ways, we're kind of designing systems that do that for us. They create
Yeah.
endless toil with no value realization. And I think that feels like an unfulfilling promise.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, it feels like it comes from the sort of Puritan American work ethic thing where like toil for its own sake is good.
Yeah.
And if you work, the person who works the hardest and has the worst time of it is actually the best person, you
It's
know?
that's honestly,
Whereas like,
yes. Yeah, that feels
yeah,
like it.
even thinking about the idea of like, let's say I was able to pull $1 million out of my business or something, and then to have all that excess and like, what do I do with it? And would it be indulgent for me to upgrade my fridge or whatever? Like,
Dude,
I think all of those sort of moral things start swirling around your head for
it's the
sure.
fridge is such a funny example. So I have a garage
Yeah.
fridge now that I fill with just drinks that I like, and it feels Like, there's something about that. That's a very American thing too. The garage fridge. I think our
Yeah.
rich friends had garage fridges growing up, but like, yeah. So where it's like, oh yeah, it would have felt wasteful, but I actually really like it. I like having
Mhm.
Coke Zero and my protein shakes available to me whenever I want them. It's better
Yeah.
than not. I don't know. And
Yeah.
so there's something I think, yeah, the idea of toil as the end ambition. I think there's a lot of religious undertones in this
Yeah,
too
for sure.
that exists in American Western culture around, yeah, like poverty as a value,
Mhm.
as like an aspirational identity
Yeah.
that sort of is built into things as well too.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, I mean, I think the other thing at play here too is like that idea. I think that a lot of people maybe, or that I would suspect people have with this too, is that if I, let's say, do the MySpace Tom, right? Like get my money and get out and just start doing
Yeah,
something
yeah,
else. I'm going to no longer have purpose. I think that's a huge part of it as well. Is like if I get my, if I get paid out in a certain way to the point where I'm comfortable and I don't really have to be in this all the time. I think that there seems like there's this weird duality or whatever where people are in the business not because they love making the product per se,
yeah,
like, oh, I'm obsessed with making the best, disposable whatever,
yeah.
and they're not actually in it to make money out of it either. They're in it to just do it. Um, they're sort of like, yeah, I feel like there's sort of a lack of purpose. So if you weren't like shooting for the win, then actually creating the thing wouldn't be particularly fulfilling.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then if you're just going for the money, you have to figure out another way for that money to help fulfill you, I guess.
yeah. Well, I think we are like purpose making machines. Like we
Mhm.
assign, we get into things and then we start assigning purpose to them to make them feel important. Like I actually that's a lot what happens with business is that there are a subset of founders that we'll put over here that like started with purpose and went like,
Mm.
I care about changing the world, and so I will start this thing. My experience is that that's not really how most things existed. Like,
Yeah.
that's not why, like, men's t-shirts companies exist, right? Like, they didn't
Yeah.
so they tend to be like, there's a product idea, there's an opportunity, I made a thing, some people wanted it, and you just started rolling down this hill, and then you start trying to assign purpose onto it. You start to, like, create mission statements and jam value and talk about the people, and, like, you start crafting it around it because we need that. We desperately crave that. So, my point is just, like, whatever's on the other side of that, you'll just do the same thing. If it's, like, your local pickleball team and the serving in your kid's classroom, all of a sudden you'll just assign for yourself the idea that that's really purposeful. Like you can that part can actually be morphed pretty easily, I think. And maybe that's a little bit cynical of me, but I don't actually buy the idea that most of us ended up in the businesses that were operating out of some grand initial impetus of purpose. I think it was more pragmatic than that. It was like, this is a way I could make money, and somebody wanted this thing, and I came up with an idea, and so I created it. Oh, and now it's making money, and so now it needs to be purposeful. I just think that that's probably closer in most cases to what has happened, and people are kind of now 10 years into it, and they're like, oh, I sell rugs. Okay, I'm a rug salesperson, but like if there was a blank slate and they didn't have to solve for the financial requirements of life, I think that
Mhm.
that space is actually really interesting to figure out, well, what would purpose be then? And would that be truer for you than the assigned purpose to the pragmatic thing?
Mhm. Yeah. It's like, remember when Dave Chappelle, I think, was on David Letterman, and he talks about like basically like what does money do for you? And he's like, money just gives you options. It allows you to choose a life.
That's right.
And that's why he walked away from the $50 million contract because he had $10 million.
That's
And
right.
he's like, the difference in choice is not enormous. And then he says, the only difference between $10 million and $50 million is an astounding $40 million. But other than that, it's like you have walking away with at a certain threshold, you're giving yourself a range of choices that's not available to most people. And within that, maybe building a purpose becomes much easier. I don't know.
I think that's right. And I you get a little taste of this where like you suddenly get just to certain points of like money where you're like, what would I do if I had more?
Mm.
I don't really know. So why am I toilet like what am I doing? Like I think there's these different points where you reach these levels of consideration along the journey, or sometimes you get to, and yeah, you take a step back and you realize that maybe the reason the business isn't producing cash isn't because it can't. It's not because your AMER goal is unachievable. It's because like there's
Mhm.
actually something in you that doesn't really care. And so you
Mhm.
don't hold the boundary to obligate the thing to that because it's not truly what matters to you. And that's like, again, I just sit with too many people where the decisions are sort of too illogical or like in a way that's like, why would you do that? Um, and
Yeah.
it's not because the goal is to create the fastest way to put the money into the shareholders' pockets. I also think there's probably just some like bad statistics around us thinking about not really understanding because people are bad at, and I don't mean people, I mean me, people, we're bad at like understanding really small, long odds of things in the same way
Mm.
we struggle to understand infinity. So like the idea of creating a really big exit is something we all aspire towards, but it is so unlikely and such a small percentage of outcomes that like actually orienting your behavior around it is really, truly crazy. In many
Yeah.
ways, it's like really crazy behavior because it happens so rarely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's maybe end on this note. Like from a practical perspective, maybe how would your business be changed for the better, across the board, if you were to approach this or approach your business using the kind of goal setting logic that you're talking about, which is again, because I want to go back to you've been framing this as a logical choice. So talk a little bit about like what I don't know what the practical implications of it would be if you were
I
to
actually, yeah,
run it this way.
so I'll tell you what my experience of it has been. Um,
Mhm.
is that like there's just a cascade of clearer decisions for everybody involved, and you'll just more clearly begin to source people who like those kinds of decisions and then eliminate the people that don't. And it makes it so that the whole organization sort of uh, has a clarity of existence, which is like if you create a financial goal that's tied to a reality of an objective that you want for yourself, then everybody kind of just knows what to do. So I'll give you, I'm going to speak to mine. Okay. And this is, I, in the process of like losing my religion, sort of had to redefine my life purpose. Like, and so I came up with these things that for me right now are sort of these operating truths. I've published them before. It's like die married to my wife, be best friends with my adult children, and try to be post-economic by the time I'm 40. Okay.
Mhm.
And so post-economic candidly meant like, I don't know, like I need about $10 million liquid that I think I could opt out of the game, so to speak, and to use the Dave Chappelle number here, like sort of get to this point where like, okay, I can make all these choices in a way that gives me a lot more optionality. Well, I'm 40. Um, and so uh, I had to think about the asset that I own, which is Common Thread Collective, and think about how to drive it to a place that could create value for me in sort of that potential. And sort of that just became the game to think about the economic goal of the organization, which became then a set of corresponding KPIs for individual contributors. Like there's literally
Mhm.
like a downstream chain of behavior that clarity enabled for me and allowed the whole organization. And what the end result is like CTC is like the most financially healthy company it's ever been, probably in part because it's the first time it ever had a financial objective in my heart. As
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
cliche as that is, like that, I think is really all it's downstream from. Now you could throw on the macro effect and blah, 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 whatever, whatever. But in reality, we just redesigned the system to produce a different kind of outcome. Whereas I would 100% contend that for 1 decade, 10 years, I designed CTC to be an experience for me.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and therefore everybody in it was sort of having an experience. And that's what they came for.
Right. And part of what you're saying is that like that's seems to kind of be like what a lot of businesses are designed for.
That's right.
Just designed to perpetuate the experience without setting an end goal. Typically.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or those things are disassociated and then it's sort of chaos and everybody's confused because there's a stated financial goal, but everyone's behavior and really the founder's behavior don't actually match that. And that's like
Mhm.
often very common too, is that like we say there's a financial goal, but the behavior doesn't align to that. And everybody goes like, I don't know, what are we trying to do? Or are we trying to do that or that? I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. So in summary, know what you want and actually build the business towards achieving that thing, whatever it happens to be. Is there anything else like you want to hit
And
or
I
draw
would
out
just
from
say
this?
that like I would challenge you that business is a vehicle where value, the rules of the game are actually sort of more objectively determined than you realize because you didn't design capitalism and you didn't design the economic system that you chose to participate in. And shareholder value is a lot of that message. It's like, can you create liquidity for your shareholders? Can you put money in their pockets? And I think if more entrepreneurs took the burden of saying, I'm going to put money, even if that shareholder is you or it's 25 people, if you took the burden to say that I'm going to, at the end of this, have the reputation as having delivered that objective, I believe that that will make more people around you more satisfied and create more life options for you in a way that will lead to increased satisfaction of you and your partners.
Sorry. Cool, folks. All right. I think that's going to do it for us for this week. Again, appreciate everybody listening, and we will talk to you next week. All right. Bye, everybody.